Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. My name is Marcelo Belenazzo, and I'm part of the AWS marketing team here in Seattle. I'm very pleased to host this webinar today, where you get to hear from AWS and Slalom Consulting, one of our advanced consulting partners, who will be able to share with you their experience using the AWS cloud to make SharePoint applications available to mobile users. I'd like to start with some housekeeping items. The duration of this webinar is going to be about 1 hour maximum. All lines are mute, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. During the webinar, you can submit your questions by using the Q&A dialog box in your browser. This webinar is being recorded, and you are going to receive a link for the recording after the session. You can always visit the AWS channels on YouTube and SlideShare for webinar replays and slide decks. Our agenda for today starts with Miles Ward, Solutions Architect at AWS. Miles will give you an overview of the AWS platform with emphasis on how to effectively run SharePoint on AWS. Next up is Greg Martin, Mobile Practice Lead at Slalom. Greg will talk about some key use cases for SharePoint and mobile solutions. And next up is John Allegre, Mobile Solutions Architect at Slalom, who will do a technical deep dive on the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator, including some lessons learned from a couple of customer implementations. So without further ado, I'll turn over to Miles. Miles, the floor is yours. Hello, Miles. Are you on the line?
Yeah, this is Miles Ward with Amazon Web Services. I appreciate everybody taking the time to get together with us this morning. I'm going to go through in about 15 minutes a review of how Amazon Web Services has built an infrastructure that really fits the SharePoint workload very well, how users of all degrees of technical depth can take advantage of our infrastructure to deploy highly scalable, highly secure, highly efficient SharePoint systems at a moment's notice. So to start with that, what I'm hoping that everybody's seeing at this point is the basic benefits of running on Amazon Web Services. So different than a physical infrastructure, a place where you buy computers up front and rack them and stack them. Cloud computing allows you to pay just for what you need, only for what you use, without an upfront capital expenditure at very low cost, and in an entirely self-service way. So we've really made it so that as a user, you deploy servers and network systems all on demand right when you need them, so that your infrastructure, in this case, a SharePoint server system, is highly available, designed for high scale and efficiency. That ends up driving, we think, a market position that's pretty unique. Amazon Web Services is a standout leader in cloud infrastructure as a service. We've been called the Coke and there's no Pepsi. We really set the standard for the application programming interface, or the API that gets used to manage infrastructure as a service globally. We've really built the largest global footprint. These systems are now available around the world in 8 distinct regions, which are clusters of data centers, and have a very, very aggressive rate of innovation that's only coupled with our excellent operational performance. So this system's a production-ready, enterprise-class, high-performance environment in which to run applications like SharePoint. We've done a lot of work to build a system that builds on top of stable building blocks to make it easy to get the kinds of scale that web-based infrastructure companies and other sort of large customers, the federal government and other groups have been able to take advantage of. So that starts with this global infrastructure, a set of servers and storage and network resources and security resources, all distributed around the globe, like I said already, and today we're at 8 different regions. And then we've extended that with a product called CloudFront that allows you to further edge cache content all the way out closer to your end users, further reducing latency. That design, that distribution of resources means that the same technicians using the same tools with the same contract, with the same billing mechanisms can deploy on 3 different continents around the planet. So inside of each region, we've built distinct, separate data center clusters called availability zones that make it easy to get enterprise-class high availability from your design without the latency and network bottlenecks and the performance impact of deploying on multiple distinct independent co-location facilities. So very, very powerful way to get the kind of benefit that you'd have when you have 2 data centers at the complexity and cost of just a little over 1. So we know a lot of customers are very concerned with security. Consider that a top-of-mind issue as it relates to the kinds of collaborative data that go into SharePoint, kinds of sensitive internal systems information. Amazon Web Services is really built, we think, far and away one of the most sophisticated environments for secure deployment. And that's built on top of a concept of shared responsibility. So Amazon Web Services is in charge of the pavement and the racks on the pavement and the servers in the rack and the operating system on the server and the hypervisor that operating system supports, all of the stuff from the building to the virtualization infrastructure that allow highly secure, highly repeatable, consistent delivery of compute as a utility. You're responsible, and Slalom's going to talk a little today about how, as a user of Amazon Web Services, or when a consultancy or another MSP or management group uses Amazon Web Services on your behalf, they're in charge of building security at the operating system layer, the application layer, all the way up through user account management. SharePoint and Windows Server have built-in very sophisticated security control, including Active Directory and other authentication methods. And together with SharePoint, we know some of the biggest customers in the world are able to deploy highly secure infrastructures that need this shared security tenant. That ends up making very important that Amazon does our part of the job. You can certainly do your best, and your partners can do their best to make sure that they do the stuff above the stack correctly, but you need to be able to trust us that we're doing our part right. And we don't think that we're able to do a very good job of that unless we get third-party groups to come in and validate what we've done. We've been able to successfully do that. We publish our SOC 1 Type 2 audit for SFAE 16 on a quarterly basis. We've received ISO 27001 certification. We're verified by BSES or PCI DSS Level 1. Federal government will allow all sorts of sensitive data under FISMA moderate control. And customers have built on top of this infrastructure successful HIPAA and ITAR compliant architectures. Those evaluations, each of them take a slightly different approach at understanding and interrogating and proving that our infrastructure meets the highest standards of physical and logical security. We do that because we know that, from the smallest customer to the largest customer, the highest bar for security is really critical. We're able to get to those levels of security through a bunch of different best case or best in class approaches, some of which are very, very difficult and very expensive to do in your own infrastructure. Things like double level biometric authentication and physical versus logical separation of duties and all sorts of other high-end control. We also give you a bunch of tools, identity and access management, that makes it easy to give rights-limited credentials to users inside your system, multi-factor authentication tokens, so you can even force somebody to have a key fob before they log in. Those foundational systems then allow the other services that we provide to operate from a very stable footing. So EC2 allows you to rent computers by the hour. EBS allows you to rent storage by the gigabyte per month. Those two systems together serve the hosting infrastructure that makes SharePoint work. S3 is a very, very powerful environment for storing data, serving data to the web. It's a great example of our scale at this point. S3 currently stores in excess of 1 trillion distinct objects. Those are objects or files. So Word documents and videos and multimedia content and HTML files and every other different kind of piece. There are 1 trillion of them in S3 at this point. And we have no expectation that the growth rate for that system will be slowing down. You take advantage of S3's incredible scale, incredible performance every time you use SharePoint in an AWS environment. We've also made it so that network security is something that's very sophisticated. We allow the kinds of connectivity that will drive your enterprise users and all the way down to the sort of most direct customers to take great benefit from the connectivity options that we offer. So with Direct Connect, you can hardwire, use MPLS circuits to run directly into the Amazon Web Services infrastructure, create a private non-internet channel into AWS. You can create a VPN link to us using virtual private cloud. You can even tell us that you want to use dedicated instances where there's no multi-tenancy, there's no one else running in the same physical infrastructure as your virtual machine. A very, very powerful tool for building an enterprise-grade infrastructure on the cloud. Above those basic building blocks, you continue to add more and more services that are very sophisticated but really designed to make your use of Amazon very, very simple. Some of them come into play in the SharePoint deployment. So that aggregation of content distribution, making it easy to do, all these other different kinds of components makes it very, very useful to deploy SharePoint in AWS. Maybe one of the probably most important of those is we've even gotten to a place where there's very simple to use management console where we're able to log right onto our website, deploy servers at a mouse click away, and really make easy changes to your infrastructure with no code required. So an important piece on top of that is that Windows runs really great on Amazon. We've really built, we think, the best infrastructure in the world to run Windows servers, and there's nothing that's complicated or unusual or strange about getting Windows machines and Windows servers and Windows applications running in the cloud. We have a lot of questions that our customers ask, like, isn't sort of Windows or Windows software in the cloud a little different? No, we're running on real licensed, full, sort of strange subversion, actual Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2. There are no CALs required for access to our stuff. You can also license SQL Server Standard via our SPLA. You can get into using virtual private cloud to create static networks that make it very, very straightforward for Windows administrators to deploy Active Directories in a way that's familiar and similar to your on-prem environment. We've really made it so that our security groups, which are firewalls at the virtual machine level, give you all the kinds of access control in VPC, even ingress and egress access control at the port and IP address level to really make sure that only the folks that are supposed to have access to the infrastructure do so. So those controls and those environments make it so that as an experienced Windows administrator, there's really not a lot to learn that's new. We've just made it so that turning the computers on is really, really straightforward. From an architecture standpoint, that ends up looking like, kind of a new network enterprise IT architecture where you're saying, yeah, we have a corporate data center. It's not able to scale at the rate that our users need. We're not able to deploy as fast as we want, as inexpensively as we want, as globally as we want. So by making those kinds of advanced network connections back to Amazon, you're able to deploy infrastructure out on the cloud with security in mind, with high performance in mind, and in an environment that's scalable. So to be real specific about how SharePoint works on top of AWS, we know a lot of customers will sort of forklift over existing architectures, existing deployments, where you have a load balancer, the web serving tier, the working front end, the application tier, the actual SharePoint servers, and then the databases in the back end. Amazon built this concept of multiple availability zones. That's why I introduced it at the beginning. Multiple availability zones allow you to add another layer of redundancy at a pretty insignificant cost. The only additional charge associated with availability zones is when you actually move data from one zone to the other. And that movement will really only happen as a result of the replication of the database that's happening in the background. So very, very inexpensive at a penny a gigabyte for that kind of movement. So an example like this where, the sort of normal, certainly you want to have 2 working front ends and 2 app tiers. That's what high availability means. In our environment, you deploy the same amount of infrastructure, but you spread it out across multiple availability zones. So now you're using 2 AVs. You're now fault tolerant to a point not just where a single machine can break and your infrastructure stays working and serving customers. You can have whole data centers fail and really experience no functional downtime to customers. So we've published a whole white paper about SharePoint. This is maybe a little more simple view that shows the threat management gateway servers, shows the web tier and the application tier, which instance types inside of our virtual private cloud using SQL Server and Active Directory on the AWS. This is a complete deployment on that. That white paper makes it very straightforward to get through understanding the deployment that we're seeing as very efficient, as very high performance. It's been something that's successfully used by a number of different federal government agencies, large enterprises that have followed this pattern as a way to build SharePoint in a way that's highly available and scalable. And this whole stack of stuff, if built using our smaller instances, can be very, very inexpensive in comparison to the same kind of physical footprint that you'd run on-prem. So to get started is relatively straightforward. Starting a Windows server takes all of about 15 minutes the first time. That lets you remote desktop into a real machine and do what you want. We have CloudFormation scripts for deploying SharePoint Foundation Server. That's a scripting language that allows programmatic deployment of AWS infrastructure. That's just a couple of clicks away, and you have a SharePoint Foundation Server up and running. And the tiniest instances from us, a thing called an M1 Micro or a T1 Micro, are available in our free tier. So you can even do a lot of this experimentation at no cost. All that's available just starting at aws.amazon.com. So certainly encourage everybody to take a quick lap and give SharePoint a try on Amazon. And with that, I'll hand it over to Marcelo to introduce my friends at Slalom.
Thank you, Miles. Thanks for your presentation. I would like to introduce Greg Martin and the Slalom Consulting team, and I'd like to reinforce how important is the role that our service partners play in these implementations. So Slalom Consulting has an extensive experience deploying Microsoft workloads on the AWS cloud, and Greg will talk today about a mobile accelerator that they built to make SharePoint applications available on the AWS cloud. So Greg, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marcelo. Yeah, I would just like to give a quick high-level overview of Slalom and what we do, and then we'll dive right into exposing your mobile applications from your SharePoint environment that's been hosted in Amazon. So if you don't know us already, Slalom is a national business and technology consulting firm spread across a number of offices in the U.S. We're running at about 1,800 consultants today. And we have a wide variety of solutions and offerings that we offer, but today we're going to specifically zero in on a few key areas, that being mobility, cloud obviously, as well as portals and collaboration through the SharePoint services. So now that you have SharePoint running in your Amazon environment, why leverage SharePoint from a mobile perspective? What are the benefits for that? In our work, we've seen a number of use cases that have come up to leverage SharePoint. Many mobile use cases are around enabling content that already exists in enterprise environment, usually in a system similar to SharePoint or probably in SharePoint. Supporting field sales, field users through that mechanism is very, very common already. SharePoint is very prevalent in the enterprise, right? About 78% of Fortune 500s, this is according to some Microsoft statistics, already have SharePoint in one form or another. So it's already out there. Taking advantage of that existing system makes a lot of sense. So SharePoint becomes a very natural fit from a content management perspective, from a content delivery perspective. But it can go further than that. It's not just about serving up documents or lists. Starting to take advantage of some of the other capabilities that SharePoint offers. For instance, data collection, inputting data into those lists, piping that data through workflow or those documents through workflow, or any other number of business cases that you can come up with or that already exist. It makes sense to leverage the platform. And then, of course, where we live today in a very mobile world, taking those use cases where relevant to a mobile device is very powerful. So some examples of these use cases that we see and the things that really drove us to building out this SharePoint Mobile Accelerator to leverage for our clients and our projects. Some of those key cases were, for instance, the very basic scenario exposing some key content from your portal to employees, all your employees potentially in a very mobile-friendly fashion. Taking that to the next level, ensuring that your field sales team always has the latest materials, the latest content. They're always up to date and have that in an offline fashion so that regardless of where they happen to be, poor connectivity on a client site that may or may not have Wi-Fi or good 3G coverage, they have access to the documents that they need. Going to the executives or the board and providing very secure access to important information, maybe temporarily or in a way that can only be distributed within the bounds of that application, and then cleared immediately thereafter, possibly very important financial information or something along those lines. And then again, taking it further, filling out forms, doing surveys externally, piping that through workflow for approvals, all key and all things that we've seen time and time again that really brought us to this solution. So I'm going to hand it over to John Allagher. He's our solution architect and the key in creating the mobile accelerator that we've leveraged. He's going to walk through some of the nuts and bolts as well as give a couple of key real-life examples that have been built on top of this technology.
Hi, my name is John Allagher. I'm a solution architect here at Slalom Consulting. We're going to, as Greg mentioned, we're going to jump into the nuts and bolts here of our SharePoint accelerator. So our clients, we're all telling us the same thing. They love SharePoint. They love the capabilities it has. They love computing in the cloud and all the advantages that gives them. But what they really need is all of that content that's in the cloud on SharePoint. They need it on their mobile device. They have sales teams out in the field or distributed employees all over the nation, and they're not always connected to the corporate VPN, and they need that content. And they want to use it in a way that's compelling and interactive and typically custom. And what we were seeing was our clients were using kind of a patchwork of solutions to make this happen today. So they may have 10 different solutions for 10 different employees. Some employees are using email to get the documents on their device. Some are using Dropbox or FTP, or they're dragging things over in iTunes manually. And, a lot of these things, they're not reliable. They're not really IT sanctioned. They're getting around all the security processes that have been put in place. They just don't work for all the situations. They're just not useful for, like I said, those field sales people. So what we did, having seen this problem repeat itself across multiple clients, was build the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator. So really the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator is all of the back-end plumbing between the device, the tablet, the phone, to SharePoint to enable that content on your device. So the accelerator really gives a a jump starter kit to be able to get that content on the device and then focus on the things that are really important to your solution, like the UI, the user experience, the business rules around different SharePoint lists and documents, really kind of the stuff that's important to the client. The client doesn't really care about what web services are being called and what to do on a delete and an update and kind of those base underlying data access aspects. What they really want is, I want this document always to be at the top of the list, and it's most important, and my salespeople have to have it all the time. So the accelerator has a few key features. We're compatible with SharePoint 2007 and 2010. We're testing against the latest version of SharePoint, and so far so good. It automatically kind of offline access to documents and lists, right? So when it's connected, it's pulling and syncing stuff down locally to the device. It's encrypting it and saving it in a way that it's not going to get backed up to Apple's iCloud. It's even on a jailbroken device, it's all encrypted. There's no way anyone can get that metadata, those files. It enables offline search for all of the SharePoint fields that would happen to be in those document libraries or lists. So you don't need to be connected to be able to search your entire document library. It's all local on the device. We support all of the document types that iOS supports out of the box, so all of the ones that people care about: PDF, PowerPoints, Word documents. There's a laundry list of file types that Apple supports, and we also support. And the last one, we support the full transaction. So we will get documents from SharePoint. We can upload documents from SharePoint or to SharePoint. We can delete documents from SharePoint. So all of that transaction logic, which is usually fairly complicated to make sure what happens in the middle of a transaction, a delete transaction, all of that is already handled. So like I said, the clients can focus on the business rules and not have to worry about kind of the underlying data access back to SharePoint. Security and access control. So the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator leverages, there's no custom security here. We're leveraging existing SharePoint authentication. Anything that your users in the field have access to in SharePoint, they'll have access to on their mobile device, and vice versa. Your users won't have access to metadata or the files or lists or anything that they don't have access to in SharePoint will not get pulled down to the device. Even in the background, even if it's not displayed, that information never even crosses the wire to their device. We can enforce document level security. So if you have a SharePoint document library with executives need a subset of those and no one else should see them, it's easy to do with built-in SharePoint security. Our mobile accelerator adheres to that. And then we've also built in a little bit of a hook to make some documents only available when you have a internet connection. So if you did have that, as Greg described, maybe that board scenario where it's a set of documents that only should be available when they're online, those documents will only be pulled down and viewed while they have internet connection. Once they're disconnected from the internet, they're no longer available on the device. So, and how is all this done? So at a high level, very high level here, we are connecting to SharePoint via SharePoint's authentication from the device. We're using the user's username and password, the same username and password they would use to connect if they were on the corporate network. We're getting back from SharePoint in XML via a web service call to SharePoint a list of entitlements. Basically, here's all of the content in SharePoint and metadata in SharePoint that user has access to. We're taking that data, we're encrypting it in a local SQLite database on the device, and then there's a couple options for step 4. In some scenarios, we're just downloading everything that's available to that user at the time. So actually the physical files, the Word documents, the PDFs, the PowerPoints are automatically downloaded. In other scenarios, it may be sort of an on-demand download where the files are downloaded only when the user requests them. So that's like one of those business rules I mentioned is really how the application should work. And then finally, all the data is back displayed to the user. So a few more key features of the accelerator. We were really adamant when we were designing this that we didn't want to have any modification or deployment to SharePoint or the SharePoint server. This should work out of the box SharePoint deployment. That's why we're using SharePoint's built-in web services, specifically the list web service, to get, update, delete all of that SharePoint data. So there's really nothing, once you have SharePoint running in AWS, there's nothing more to deploy. You can point our accelerator at SharePoint and start writing your code to build your app. We honor, as I mentioned before, we honor SharePoint security. There's nothing more. We're not keeping like a custom table of users and passwords and things like that. We're honoring the SharePoint security using your domain username and password, or the username and password that how you would log in to SharePoint, just the same as on your corporate domain. We're, as I mentioned before, again, we're locally encrypting everything. So everything that gets on the device is encrypted. This is really, I think, a key benefit. There's lots of SharePoint apps out there in the App Store. A couple things you can't guarantee about them is how are they storing the data on the device, and with that, are they marking that data on the device in a way that makes sure it doesn't get uploaded to Apple's iCloud. You don't want your sensitive corporate data just getting uploaded up to iCloud without the user's knowledge. That would definitely break a lot of IT security standards. And then the accelerator really works. It minimizes network traffic by once it pulls down that data, we're only getting differences back from SharePoint. So as things get updated and deleted, we're not constantly syncing the entire SharePoint database. We're just getting the changes that have happened on SharePoint. So we're trying to minimize that network traffic. A lot of corporate users are on cellular data plans on their iPads and their iPhones, and we just want to limit how much we're going over the wire and using up their battery trying to get data back from SharePoint. So the first real-world example of this is something we built internal for ourselves, and it's called Spotlight. And we built Spotlight so our consultants and our business development people could kind of tell the Slalom story in an interactive and unique way. We wanted them to enable the clients, our consultants and our business development people to kind of build custom presentations in the browse and search content. And we wanted to do it in a way that would look and feel as good as like a digital magazine. So the screenshot you're seeing here isn't just one file within SharePoint. It's 15 files within SharePoint, all organized and arranged in a way that's very compelling and interactive. So almost everything you're looking at on the screen, which it's hard to tell from the slide, is some sort of touch-enabled. So you can start videos, you can start audio, you can swipe back and forth where you see the little screenshots, and that's kind of a scrolling display. We tried to really, we're looking at apps like Wired Magazine and Golf Digest that you can download for your iPad, and trying to mimic that in a way, but using SharePoint as our content backend. The next app that we built for general growth properties around this was challenging in that they had over 10,000 documents that they wanted to get to their field salespeople on the device. So, thinking that much data was obviously a challenge. We built a custom UI to allow the user to select and subscribe to different sets of documents. The other challenge about this project was they had all of the content organized one way in SharePoint, but they wanted to present it to the user in two different ways on the device. So we're taking the metadata on the device and devising its own browsing structure that is completely separate than what was in SharePoint. So that's really a a great example of that business rule I talked about where other connectors would just pull down that data and show it to you exactly the way it's stored. Here we're able to write some business rules on top of our connector and display the data in new and different ways that is completely separate than the storage organization, all based on the SharePoint metadata. So with that, I'll give it back to Marcelo for, I believe, Q&A.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, John, and thanks to all presenters. Now we're going to start the Q&A session, and we're going to take a few questions from the audience. If you haven't done so, please submit your questions now using the Q&A panel on your browser. And we'll start with a few questions that were submitted recently. So we got a few questions around the Apple platform, the Apple devices. So I think those questions are for John. John, could you clarify if the mobile accelerator works with iPhone, iPod Touch, and also there are some questions around the versions of the iOS operating systems that are supported.
Yeah, so we've designed the SharePoint Accelerator to work with iOS 4.0 and above. So any device that's network enabled that can run Apple's iOS 4.0 and above can run the SharePoint Accelerator. So even your iPod Touches, iPhones, and iPad, the first generation through the most recent Retina generation will all work with the SharePoint Accelerator.
Excellent. Okay, so there's another question here. I think that's for Greg. If the app is actually available in the App Store.
No, this is and this is a good point of clarification. The accelerator is a framework. It's a baseline for building ultimately custom enterprise solutions. So it's an asset that we bring to the table in order to build, as John mentioned, right, to be able to conform to that very specific user experience, UI, and business rules for a particular business problem. All the baseline SharePoint complexities and communication come along with this particular asset for that. So it's not a public-facing application in the App Store.
Okay, excellent. We got a few questions about the SharePoint environments that are supported. I think specifically if it supports on-premise SharePoint environments as well.
Yeah, the SharePoint Accelerator will really, anywhere you have SharePoint installed, the Accelerator can point at that installation and run against that. So whether you're on-prem or AWS, if it's the Accelerator will work on or offline in those scenarios. So.
Excellent. We got a few questions here, Miles, around the SharePoint running on AWS and what AWS services are necessary to run SharePoint in the cloud.
Sure. We make a pretty strong recommendation for a subdivision of the SharePoint infrastructure across services from us that are best designed to run each of those pieces. But certainly at the minimum, you can run a single Windows server running SharePoint and running the required SQL server. We don't think that works at maximum scale, but running a single EC2 instance is the smallest piece. Most customers are deploying multiple EC2 instances. Those are computers that you rent from us by the hour, and then using EBS drives. Those are our persistent storage. To ensure that the data stores are highly available and are backed up to S3. And then also some customers are using standard SQL Server deployed on SQL Server AMIs through EC2 instances, or you can also use our managed hosted SQL Server database service called RDS that makes it push-button easy to deploy SQL Server databases. All those services really also back up and replicate their data to S3 on demand by customers. So the S3 service gets used quite a bit. At the working front end, out in front of a fleet of SharePoint servers, you'll typically have elastic load balancers to distribute the load and Route 53 to manage DNS. So those are all the different parts.
Excellent. We got a few more questions for the Slalom team, and I think the first one here is around Android devices and if the accelerator work works on Android devices?
Yeah, so currently the accelerator has been built for iOS. So we really looked at what's the penetration of enterprise devices out there. iOS is a big chunk of that list. We do realize that Android is also heavily leveraged out there, and it is on our roadmap, along with Windows 8, both tablets and Windows Phone 8 as well. So current state is iOS, but very shortly down the line are other platforms.
Okay, and we got some questions around integration with InfoPath, if there is any possibility to integrate the accelerator with InfoPath.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of InfoPath, there isn't any explicit InfoPath support today. It is possible to leverage some of the existing InfoPath mobile solutions in conjunction with the accelerator, an app that's been built on the accelerator. So for instance, the Formoda solution would be a good pairing with that for those types of solutions.
Okay. We also got a few questions around integration with SharePoint Online and Office 365, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, we've tested against both of those. And yeah, like I said, anywhere that SharePoint's installed and running the list web service, the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator can pull content from that SharePoint instance. So, yeah, there's nothing really. We tried to keep the accelerator as generic and versatile as possible, so that we're not doing anything unique for on-prem or AWS or Office 365. We're just using out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality.
Okay, excellent. So we got a question for John regarding the architecture of the accelerator, and if it's a server-only deployment or if it includes a client component, how does it work?
The accelerator it's an Objective-C library written for iOS right now. Like Greg mentioned, some other platforms are in the pipeline. It's compiled down and bundled up with an iTunes IPA file. There's no server components, so everything's installed on your iPad, iPhone, or iPod Touch. Once it's on there, all you really need is that network connection back to your SharePoint environment, which could be over the open internet, or it also will support a VPN connection if you do have your SharePoint locked down to VPN only. So.
Excellent. I guess this also answers one of the other questions we had around the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator working over VPN.
Right. Yeah. And VPN, if the device is configured, it's really a device configuration that the SharePoint Mobile Accelerator will leverage. So if the device is configured to connect over VPN, and obviously you're logged in, connected, the accelerator can leverage that connection to pull that content from your SharePoint environment.
Excellent. We got a question here around the AWS services that the accelerator leverages. Could you clarify?
We're not leveraging any AWS services directly. We're only leveraging SharePoint web services. Again, the accelerator will run almost anywhere you have SharePoint installed.
Okay, excellent. We got another technical question regarding the accelerator and if it provides support for SharePoint claims authentication regardless of the trusted identity provider. I guess it's around authentication.
Yeah, I mean, we do support multiple authentication modes with the accelerator. I'll be honest, we haven't run into that exact scenario yet. But the example we showed for general growth properties actually had two different forms of authentication working on it. So whether they were inside or outside the network, the connector would actually connect to the SharePoint environment, one way using a token and the other way using just a standard HTTP authentication challenge. So we do support multiple authentication methods, and I think that's, again, the accelerator's sort of strength, and something that you would buy directly out of the App Store wouldn't be able to handle one or more authentication modes for the same environment, but we could figure out based on what network they were on and what servers were available, which authentication mode to use, and just use that seamlessly. The user never knew what was happening behind the scenes. They just put in their username and password.
Okay, excellent. And I guess we're getting our last question here, and it's a broader question for Greg around the SharePoint services and maybe other services provided by Slalom. If you could detail a little more in terms of Slalom's competencies and especially around SharePoint.
Yeah, absolutely. SharePoint is a big part of our technical competency. We have, I'd say, we've made Microsoft Partner of the Year a number of years for that competency, and across all of our markets have a deep expertise in the space. I would invite you to visit our website, slalom.com, and then also reach out to us for further information, but we would certainly love to have further conversations about that particular topic as well as the other areas that we've covered. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, John and Miles. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. That wraps up today's presentation. And again, thank you for attending today's session. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the link for this presentation and for the recording. And on behalf of Amazon Web Services and our presenters, thank you for joining us today.